Well, we're being recorded, so that's our cue to get started. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone from wherever you're joining from. It's great to have you here for our session today called Turning AI Possibilities into UX Realities. I wanted to kick us off with a couple quick housekeeping notes before I hand it over to our two excellent speakers. Just to note that we will be recording this session, as you just heard from Zoom, and sharing it out afterwards. We did also save plenty of time at the end for Q&A, so please post any questions you have in the Q&A box along the bottom bar of your Zoom screen. And then during Q&A, I can either fill those questions out, or something we like to do a lot here at Dscout is unmute any folks who left questions so they can ask the questions directly if they'd like to. And this is like a little bit more of a collaborative back and forth compared to a typical webinar. So with that, I am going to hand this off to Nathan and Yaron to introduce themselves before diving in what they have for us today.
Awesome. Hey, everyone. I'm Nathan. I'm a UX researcher at Dscout, focused on the development and deployment of some of our AI features. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm based in Brooklyn, New York. On Dscout's AI team, I've been focused on AI summarization of qualitative research data, which has included technical research on refining analysis approaches and outputs, as well as user research on how people might use or have used the tools we're developing and where we might go in the future. Yaron, I'll hand it off to you to introduce yourself now.
Thank you so much, Nathan. My name is Yaron. I'm a lead design researcher working for a major international bank. I'm based in Montreal, Canada, and my pronouns are he, him. I met AI at several different points in my career. First, as a UX researcher working with AI to basically make better decisions. And then as a UX researcher working on the development of AI applications and making sure that we are on the right direction. Recently, I started a bit of a quest trying to figure out how UX researchers can take advantage even more on AI tools and do more interesting work. I've been writing about it in several different platforms, and I'm very happy to be here today and share more about this.
Awesome. With that, let's dive in. I'm sure most people here have had at least some experience with AI in the last few years, but to make sure we're all in the same, Yaron, I'm wondering if you can give us a little intro crash course on AI.
Definitely, Nathan. So let's talk a little bit about what AI actually means. So I think nowadays there are actually two main types of AI. There's predictive AI, which has been around for quite some time, and there's the more younger version of it, generative AI, or Gen AI in short. And we have to basically understand what each one means. So just in a nutshell, predictive AI, if you think of any, let's say, recommendation engine, such as what you see on platforms like Spotify or Amazon, that give you recommendations for things, songs, or products you might like, this is predictive AI. Usually the algorithms power just tidbits of insights, but they don't necessarily create anything novel. So that's where Gen AI gets into the picture. It's much more exciting. It's an algorithmic creation of novel content, such as text, images, music. Good examples are obviously ChatGPT, Midjourney, DALL-E. And I think what's common to both types of AI is the fact that the creation is done through pattern identification in large data sets that essentially enables the creation of other insights or novel content. And what we have to remember is that both types can be applied in a number of different ways in UX research, and there are ways to leverage both.
Awesome, thank you. So now that we have a baseline understanding of what we mean when we say AI, let's start talking about AI as it relates to UX research. Here at Dscout, we see a lot of opportunity in both AI's ability to help researchers execute research, as well as researchers' ability to aid AI development. Most of today's chat will be about how AI can help researchers execute research. So let's quickly touch on the latter point first about how research can help aid AI development. At Dscout, we're approaching AI development with a research mindset versus the typical move at a breakneck speed tech approach. Our AI team is infusing every step of our AI development process with both technical research and UX research to ensure that our AI features will truly help teams run faster, better research. And in the spirit of centering our users and their needs in our AI development process, we're placing high importance on compliance, zero data retention policies with third-party services, and making sure that all AI-generated content is clearly labeled and available on an opt-in basis. Yaron, I'm curious to hear how all of this sits with you and if you have any additional thoughts on how UXR should shape AI development.
Definitely. So first of all, Nate, it's exciting to see these developments happening on your end. And to start answering this question, I'd like to first of all mention a book that I really liked by Ben Schneiderman on human-centered AI, and some of the principles that he actually mentioned that are essential to make AI trustworthy from a user standpoint. So the first principle is transparency, which means from a user standpoint, I want to know how the AI system actually got to the decision that they decided to make. And UXR can really help kind of like mimic this, in prototypes and test with users their understanding of, not just the output that they see, but also the steps listed by the system on how it made decisions and how that actually makes them feel from a trust standpoint. The second thing that's mentioned in the book that I think UXR can really help validate is accountability. So that's catering to another group of users that's more about developers and operators of the system. The idea is to create some sort of like audit trails for them to be able to troubleshoot if something goes wrong. And once again, you can mimic this in a prototype and actually test it with a group of people who have this kind of roles and understand their comprehension of the audit trails and also their level of trust in what they actually see. The third principle is about privacy, which is, I see it right here on the screen. I think the idea here is to understand if our users can actually read and understand privacy policies, understand their right to opt in and out, and all of this can be tested by UX researchers. And the last thing that was mentioned, and I'd like to touch upon, is bias. Everybody wants to know that the system that they work with is not biased or have a very minimal bias. So in that case, it's the org's responsibility to do some testing on this, but also from a UXR perspective, once you actually get some good, I guess, explainable systems that tell you, the limits of the system and what it can and cannot do, then you can test it from a user standpoint and see that your users can actually understand all of this. One last thing I wanted to mention, if you actually want to make, AI solutions even more great, then UXR can further help by understanding the persona that's more likely to benefit from AI solutions. Based on what I've done in one of my previous positions, I've learned that, there are basically personas who would like to really almost like outsource all the responsibility for what they need to do to an AI-based solution. But then the more expert you become, you sometimes want to basically take some control over the output and really more like, collaborate with the AI. And this is where you can, as a UX researcher, step in and understand the job to be done by the different personas and understand, once you start mapping the customer journey, at what point a user would like to take control from the AI-based solution, what kind of parameters they would like to adjust themselves, and really use all this output generated by research activities to develop better solutions that can help, I guess, anybody who uses the system create better solutions for themselves together with the AI.
Thanks for sharing all of that. I'm sure we have some people here who are working on researching AI solutions. So I think these guidelines are really, really helpful to keep in mind. So now that we've touched on how research can influence AI development, I want to switch gears to how AI can aid research execution. Yaron, before we get into the weeds of the use cases you've been exploring, I'm wondering if you can give us a high-level overview of how you think UX researchers can benefit from AI augmentation.
Definitely, Nathan. So I think that in order to understand that big question of how UXR can leverage AI now and potentially even more in the future, we have to think about the holistic research journey and the different stages where AI can actually be useful to a UX researcher. So if we think about it, most of us start our work talking to stakeholders and doing some requirement gathering. And I think at this stage, it's better to focus on the human element and really develop your own soft skills of talking to humans, because here AI might not be so useful. However, once you actually do understand a little bit what is the problem you're going to be working on, this is where you can start engaging AI in some sort of knowledge harvest. And there are a few solutions that you can already leverage out in the market. For example, Scholar AI, for those of you who are familiar with this customized ChatGPT, it's essentially a customized ChatGPT that helps you to understand the recent, I guess, research that was done in academia about the topic that you're curious about. And this way you can identify some knowledge gaps and understand where you as a UX researcher can basically start to dig in a little bit more. I think, several organizations already have research repositories in place, and in the future, we're probably more likely to see some generative AI solutions that can actually be plugged in straight into your org's repository and then help you start understanding what other researchers before you came in worked on and how you can leverage this research, so then you can basically not have to reinvent the wheel. So this is knowledge harvest. Now, moving to the next step, which is designing, tests and studies and research activities. This is where AI can almost give you a divergent thinking muscle. I know that we, as UX researchers, we are usually focused on the problem space, on understanding, what the actual problem is and defining it, not so much on divergent thinking and ideation and brainstorming. But this is where especially if you work alone and you don't necessarily have a thinking partner, this is where AI can help you come up with a few more questions or a few other ways of thinking this or asking the same thing. And this is where, Gen AI can be leveraged to come up with a more interesting research plan. I think another area where this could be interesting is the area of analysis, where I think more potentially in the future, once we have safe and reliable systems, we can start using generative AI to basically synthesize raw data and understand a little bit better what's happening, and even leverage it to connect to other data sources. I think that when it comes to analysis and synthesis, both predictive AI that I mentioned before and Gen AI can be useful. I personally, as a researcher, worked with a system that leveraged descriptive AI back in the day. We actually did some of the manual work ourselves and then ran it through an algorithm that gave us some clusters of thoughts. So that was really cool to work with and really cool to see. And I think, in the future, we're probably going to see more of this coming to our reality. And lastly, when it comes to the last step, which is usually for most of us, sharing back the results of our research presentation, I don't think that there are very good solutions right now, but I think in the future we might see something along the lines of an actual coach, AI coach that can help give you recommendations on how to improve your presentation and cater it to different audiences.
Thanks for sharing. It's really cool to hear someone with so much AI experience like you talk about all the different ways that it can be implemented, because there are just so many different possibilities for this technology. So it's exciting to chat through. In a moment, I know you're going to talk us through some specific deep dive use cases on how researchers can use AI as a tool in their toolbox. Before we get into that, I'm wondering if you can speak to your idea of AI savvy users versus citizen AI developers, and the type of skills that people can learn to move from an AI savvy user to a citizen AI developer.
Definitely. That's a very good question, Nathan. And I think, first of all, we have to clarify these terms and understand what they actually mean. So AI savvy user, I would consider it as somebody who knows how to work with AI to produce a better output rather than working completely alone. A citizen AI developer is a step up from this. It's somebody who understands AI to some degree and understand how to build a customized application, customized, let's say in my case, ChatGPT, for a specific use case. So to get to this point, I think, first of all, just to become an AI savvy user, I think you have to have good communication skills, because you have to do a lot of prompting, at least in today's tools. You have to be able to communicate to the AI what you actually want it to do for you. You have to communicate to your stakeholders what you've done with the AI. But then to get to the point where you're a citizen AI developer, you have to have a few more skills. I would recommend on having a basic understanding of how AI works, at least at the conceptual level, because you want to understand how, let's say, the editor ChatGPT that enables you to essentially build all this application works. Once again, you don't have to understand coding, you have to understand prompting at a bit of a higher level. And you also have to have some good critical thinking skills, because you're going to get output from your Gen AI tools. And sometimes it's not going to be the best output or what you wanted right away. So you need to be able to understand how to evaluate this and what you need to do next to get to the place where you get a good output. Just before we dive into the use cases, I wanted to mention another thing. I know that nowadays, Gen AI is still pretty young. And because of this, some of the tools that we have in market right now are susceptible to errors and hallucinations. So I really aimed for use cases where we can use the AI almost as an extra muscle to get inspiration, but not necessarily very accurate answers. I would refrain from using it for these kind of cases.
Great. Yaron, I'll pass the mic to you then for the next section of this webinar to chat through your two deep dive use cases that you've explored using AI for.
Right. Thank you, Nathan. All right, so let's get started with some fun stuff. So I'm going to talk about two use cases where I try to envision, a future where some of us become citizen AI developers, and we actually leverage the large language models to do some things for us. I wrote about it specifically on Medium, and I'm going to take you through some of the steps here. So the first use case is about strategic foresight. And for those of you who are not familiar with strategic foresight, it's a set of research methods that's used to consider possible and plausible future scenarios. It's usually, I would say, is part of the family of generative research. It's usually done at the beginning of the process, and researchers can use it to build scenarios and narratives based on signals that are basically or can be found in different places. I'm going to touch upon it in a second. And the reason why this could be very helpful is because if you work on any, let's say, strategic research project, it's more in the realm of, let's say, service design, systemic design, strategy design, then you can use these scenarios to understand the reality that you're designing a solution for. The solution can be a strategy, the solution can be a user interface, and the solution can be a service blueprint. But the idea is to understand the future world use it as a starting point, and then start designing for it. The main challenge is that it's, as I said, a very specialized niche of research methods, and it's not a very intuitive way of thinking for most folks. Even if you're trained in this, sometimes, we have a lot of human biases. We're not wired to think about the future in certain ways. So this is where AI tools like ChatGPT can help a lot and give you an extra muscle to at least teach you how to think this way. Let's go to the next slide. So as I mentioned before, ChatGPT editor, this is where if you want to build a customized ChatGPT for any use case, you have to think about the steps you want a user to go through once they use your application. So to do this, I started breaking down the scenario that I wanted to use into like just high-level steps, and then obviously I had to describe it to ChatGPT that this is what I wanted to do. So I wanted to go from, let's say we find a signal. Signal means, a piece of information, could be news, could be something in a more academic article, but it's usually a piece of information about phenomena that are a bit out of the ordinary. It's not mainstream media. And we'll see one in a second, so it will all be a bit more clear. But the idea is to go from this to building a scenario about what happens if this little signal becomes a reality. So the first step is really to write the signal in a few words. Sometimes you can even add a link to the article. ChatGPT, then you choose the type of scenario that you want ChatGPT to generate for you, or several scenarios, and we're going to see what the possible scenarios are in a second. Then you're getting an output, you read the scenario, you think if that actually makes sense to you, and then to make the scenario a bit more rich, you can ask ChatGPT to develop a narrative around it, and then you can use this narrative to do an ideation session, group discussion. It's usually one of these boundary objects that you can take into a workshop and then work with your stakeholders, clients, co-workers on developing solutions for it. Let's go to the next slide. And here I'm going to tell you a little bit about the scenarios that are pretty common in strategic foresight, but my idea was to really use the customized ChatGPT to generate them for me. So on the right-hand side, you would see the graphical representation of what I'm going to touch upon in a second. Scenario one, which is basically the arrow that goes up, is an extrapolation of trends that continues into the future with minimal disruption. So let's say whatever we found, whatever we read about, that becomes the norm. It's just growing over time. Scenario number two is a transformation scenario where society or systems fundamentally change or reorganize around a new paradigm. Could be a new technology comes up, maybe just a new social norm, and then everything kind of changing accordingly. Scenario number three is a scenario of constraint, which is a core guiding value or purpose organizing society and governance behavior. So this is usually happens when a government, let's say, passes a new law, when a professional organization decides to regulate the entrance to a profession, and then you have this sort of constraint. And then scenario number four is about collapse, which is a rapid catastrophic system and infrastructure breakdown, usually just decline of what we've seen before. So how ChatGPT could actually help us as researchers understand these scenarios a little bit better. Let's go to the next slide. So I want to show you how I did this and how I actually tested my own solution, looking through the lens of using or a user using one of these signals that I mentioned. So science alert, this is by all means not mainstream media. And I selected an interesting signal that's related to the field of environmental impact. We're disrupting Earth's salt cycle through activities such as mining and construction, and this poses a significant risk to fresh water. So if you think about it, this is not something that is talked about very often when, when it comes to other environmental or compared to other environmental impacts. So if I wanted to really understand, okay, so what are the implications of this? I tried to run this, by the application that I built. Let's go to the next slide and see what that actually looks like. So the customized ChatGPT is called Foresight Facilitator. As you can see, I typed the link. I basically gave a very short description of this. My application is specifically for Canada, which is where I live. Wanted to understand a little bit what the implications of something like this could be on, on life in Canada a few years from now. And the first thing that happens is ChatGPT actually asks you if you want to generate any of these scenarios that we touched upon. It just gives you a bit of a better description of what that means, in terms of life in Canada. So we are going to see an example of what a growth scenario looks like. It's basically how might Canada adapt or benefit from this situation. I could also ask ChatGPT to look into different scenarios, but I really wanted to, for the sake of this webinar, to focus on one. So if we go to the next slide, I can show you the output. So in this scenario, Canada experiences significant advancements in environmental technology and policy making. The government and private sector collaborate to develop innovative solutions for maintaining balanced salt levels in water bodies. These solutions not only prevent damage to freshwater ecosystems, but also foster economic growth. So all positive things, pretty much, if you think about it, from a high level perspective. So said to myself, okay, that actually gives me, a few potential areas to explore. But what if I actually wanted to make this something a bit more interesting for a workshop, something that can spark an interesting conversation, an interesting ideation solution. So this is where the next step from this, which is creating narratives, comes into place. We go to the next slide. We can start understanding, what the future could look like 10 years from now, what people are excited about when they hear about all these things. Obviously the green tech sector booms. There are more international investments in talent and more courses in universities, and all of this is great, but there's also some, worries about the rapid pace of industrial growth in the green sector, potentially leading to new forms of environmental impacts. Economic disparities might arise, favoring certain regions where, this industry is located. So this is, a way to understand and dig a little bit better and really leverage the process of working together with AI and understand how we as researchers can collaborate with it, let's say, in an area which requires a bit more, I guess, creative thinking rather than accurate answers. And if we go to the next slide, I'll just wrap up this use case and talk a little bit about some of the conclusions and insights I had from this, from going through this process. So as you can see, some of the scenarios and the narratives are pretty generic. And this is why I mentioned right from the beginning, inspiration is the name of the game. You want to ideally use something like this, or at least the output you're getting from ChatGPT, as a starting point before you continue to dig further and, I guess, consolidate these scenarios with more knowledge. It's cool, though, to be able to get some help, in the thinking process and understand how to go from theory to actual applications of this field called strategic foresight. And I think that in the future, as I mentioned before, we're probably going to see more options to connect these tools to curated data sources about signals, about even the research that we as UX researchers do within our own organizations, all of this can become signals that can feed into the creation of scenarios and narratives like this, and we're probably are going to see more options to do more interesting things. So this is case number one. If we go to the next slide, I'm going to talk about the other case that's a bit more, I guess, straightforward, the case of storyboarding. So as you can see, the image itself, I generated it with DALL-E because I wanted to kind of like depict, the idea of AI helping us to come up with a storyboard. And I'm sure many people in this call know what a storyboard is, but in case you don't, storyboarding is pivotal in bringing narratives to life, allowing us to almost live through situations and ideate solutions to address what we see. As UX researchers, we could leverage the power of storyboarding when we run workshops, co-creation or ideation or brainstorming research activities that actually require some sort of like a visual artifact, boundary object, visual articulation of ideas to then spark, once again, ideation, debates, conversations, you name it. But the main challenge is that and once again, AI tools can really help us here. Many of us do not necessarily come from, the visual art background. And then because of this, we have limited graphic design skills, limited sketching skills. And some of us just don't use it because of this. Now, in the world of 2024, I'm also mindful of the fact that, budget to hire dedicated resources are limited, and sometimes people skip it all together. But then what I really wanted to try out here is to leverage the power of AI to create this storyboarding or to create a storyboard for us. So then we see how easy it is, and then we start leveraging it more in our research. Let's go to the next slide. So as I mentioned before, this time I used ChatGPT editor, and I basically took advantage of DALL-E, the engine that creates images that's embedded within the ChatGPT 4 version. And I tried to think about, the steps that a user would have to go through to generate a storyboard. The first thing is obviously to think about the big picture storyline, the theme, like what is the actual experience that we're talking about here. So I have to describe this, and then you have to start thinking about the individual steps, almost like the customer journey that we want to describe visually in images. We have to decide how many steps we would like to show in the storyboards. The steps and the actual little images are called vignettes. The next thing is to decide about the look and the feel and select a visual style that resonates with the storyline's tone, user's perspective, and then actually design the vignettes by articulating the vision. What do we want to actually happen in each scene? And also from an artistic standpoint, understand, let's say, the angle we want to show the people, how many people we want to have in each scene, things like that. I'm going to show it in a second in a concrete example. Let's go to the next slide. I'll take a sip of water. So I wanted to think about a real use case, something that's becoming more and more common, intermodal travel. So intermodal travel, we're going between, let's say, point A and point B, and you're doing one leg of the trip by, let's say, train and bus, and then the other one by airplane. So two types of transportation modes. And the interconnection between airplanes and trains is becoming very common in Europe. There are some good cases in France, Switzerland, and in Austria that I know about. I'm sure in other places too. Not so much in North America. That's a mental model that's still a little foreign to most of us. And I wanted to understand, let's say, how would an experience like this look from a user perspective? And if I actually needed to design a solution for this, how would I describe this whole thing in a storyboard? So I developed, once again, customized ChatGPT to help me do this, and I ran through this use case with this application. So let's go to the next slide. So on the left-hand side, this is basically when I started to create the baseline image. I wanted to create a story about a young student who goes to school in a small university town in Italy. She has to travel back home for the holidays. She starts, her journey from a small train station where she has to basically go into a major airport. Let's say, I don't know, it's Milan or Rome. And then she has to fly to another country. Let's say it's Germany or Denmark. And then basically all these steps have to appear here on the storyboard. So the baseline image really depicts, the opening scene almost of getting into the train station. And as you can see, the text is a little bit off. And this is one of the main problems that I identified right away with some of the solutions that exist nowadays to generate images. But then once I actually understood it, I like this, sketch-like almost style. I had to tweak it a little bit, ask for having, let's say, more people in the train station. I started using, ChatGPT actually gives you a little seed, which is a serial number with combination of letters and digits. Use this style to start generating the other vignettes. So as you can see, we're going into the train station, we have to check in, and then this is a great place, let's say in an ideation session, to ask, what do we want to happen here? Do we want people to actually check in their luggage and collect it at the airport, or only after they get to their final destination? Is the boarding pass going to be applicable for both the train and the plane journey? Like all these kind of questions can come up. Then, of course, there's the actual journey by train, by plane. There's landing, at the final destination, picking up luggage and leaving the airport. So to be able to generate the storyboard, yes, you have to do some final tweaks. You have to obviously bring all the individual images to one Canva. It can be, something as simple as PowerPoint or something a little bit more, I guess, advanced. In my case, I used Affinity Designer. But the main thing to remember is that the tweaks that you usually have to do are very minimalistic. You don't have to go into graphic design or anything like that. Let's go to the next slide. So I guess the main conclusion points that I've had are these final things to keep in mind when it comes to using AI tools for storyboarding. First of all, you have to use your imagination, because you really have to come up with the story. You can leverage AI to give you some ideas for, let's say, like the little scenes, the little vignettes that happen, but you have to really understand how to use your imagination to really come up with a nice storyline and nice actual breakpoints within the story. The other thing you have to do is to learn how to prompt or build prompts that are related to visual language, such as what kind of style you would like to see in each vignette, how would you like to, I guess, build your scene. And there are websites such as DALL-E List that can actually help you with this. So I would highly recommend on leveraging them. As I mentioned before, you might still need to tweak some of the images a little bit because, there are some limitations to the system. And one last point that's pretty important. I know some people actually like to bring wireframes into storyboards. I don't think DALL-E and Midjourney and this family of tools is very good for wireframe creation. They are not so good at depicting the very small details. For this, it's still better to work with an in-house designer or use other tools such as Galileo AI, which is prompting for the creation of wireframes. as a starting point. Once again, you'll have to tweak this as well. So just remember, it's better to use these tools such as DALL-E and Midjourney for the actual scene, and then designers or other tools for wireframes. So that concludes the two use cases.
Awesome. Thanks for walking us through those, Yaron. I personally feel that with AI specifically, it's really helpful to see these methods and their associated outputs in action to really wrap my head around how I might use them in my own research. Before we open up to audience Q&A, I wanted to circle back to the idea of risks or special considerations for using AI in research. Now that we all have a better understanding of how you've been exploring AI for research execution, I'm wondering what final wisdom you would give us as it relates to risk mitigation and responsible AI usage.
Definitely, that's a great question. And I think, the key is to really know the limits of the AI system that you are working with or you're developing in your company, what it can generate, and also make sure that these limits are clear to your users so then they can make the most out of the solution.
Great. Thanks again for sharing your AI knowledge with us today. With that, I'll pass the mic over to Colleen to share some audience questions.
Excellent. I know we are running a little short on time, so I will see how many of these we can get through. A lot of folks had questions around actual AI tool recommendations or resources. So one of them was from Aurelia. She mentioned that she's heard that ChatGPT is not great with numbers. Yaron, can you suggest an AI tool that is perhaps better at data analysis for quant research?
So for quant research, I used to actually work with, I was an employee in a company called Thought Exchange, and they had a very nice platform that enables you to do research that I guess combines both quantitative and qualitative resources. I'm not sure where they are at nowadays. Once again, that's more predictive AI. So anything that has to do, I guess, with with numbers would probably be more on the predictive AI side of things. Beyond this, I'm a little less familiar with what's available for this specific type of research.
Great. And since we did get a couple different resourcing questions, I think what we'll do just to be efficient with time is I'm going to drop a link to our People Nerds community, and we can share out a list in that space with some AI resources and some of the tools we talked about today. And feel free. I know you're very active in that channel, so we can always continue some of the async Q&A there. But one question would be, how do you apply AI storyboarding to specific product experiences or flows?
So that's a great question. So I think the question is, what do you actually want to do with the storyboard? So let's say if you want to create a completely new product and work on understanding how it can solve a problem, then you can decide that the storyline is going to be that problem. And then you basically use the storyboarding. You use the AI to generate storyboarding, and then you put it in front of, let's say, the people who work with you or the potential customers, and you try to understand with them what a good solution could look like. The storyboarding can be used in this case to kind of mimic the reality or to evoke real emotions and ask customers, is this actually what you're experiencing? Just really understand their world a little bit better. In some other cases, if we already have a solution, I think, what some people do with storyboarding is understanding how this solution fits an actual reality. So then you flip it, you try to create a storyboard where a person is already using the solution, and you try to go from there and understand, if something is missing, if, you'd like to test it in the real world in certain scenarios that are similar to what you're showing in the storyboard. So it really can fit different parts of the UX research process.
Excellent. And I think our last question, before we might have to shift it over to async, will be, can you share some more on how you kind of learned and practiced creating prompts since, you know, that's how you're able to create these images in storyboarding?
Definitely. So I used a few available courses, both, I wanted to understand, first of all, how AI works in general. So I took some courses from IBM on understanding the very basics. But then there are plenty of other things on YouTube, on Udemy, that actually teach you how to do prompting for certain applications. I think, let's say the prompting for visual tools is a bit different from the prompting for the more like textual tools. So I got the basics over there, and then it was pretty much just practicing and experimenting and seeing, what I'm able to generate with the existing tools.
Great. Well, with that brings us to our 45-minute mark. I want to say thank you to everyone for joining, and a huge thank you to Nathan and Yaron for sharing your insights and experiences with us. For everybody who dialed in, you will receive a recording of the session in your inbox within 24 hours. Sometimes it's sooner. And if you're interested in continuing the conversation, you're welcome to join the People Nerds Slack space. And we will share out some additional info on some of those tools and resources that folks were asking about that we didn't have a chance to answer. So thanks very much, everyone, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.